We are sitting here in early 2026, and we're looking at a musical landscape that just feels like it shifts under our feet every single day.
Constantly.
But today, we're going to stop the clock. We're going to look at something, or really someone, that has managed to stand firm for, over 50 years now.
It's an incredible span of time.
We're talking about Blondie, and I don't mean just, the greatest hits collection that everyone has on their phone.
No, this is much bigger than that.
We are talking about an entity that really pioneered the new wave genre, survived the whole implosion of the punk scene, navigated that corporate takeover of the 80s, and is somehow, against all odds, still making headlines right now.
It's a massive subject.
Yeah.
I mean, usually when we discuss legacy acts, we're talking about them in the past tense. We're sort of looking at a museum piece.
Right, it's history.
But with Blondie, we're looking at a living, breathing organism that has just gone through, well, perhaps the most traumatic year in its entire history.
That's a huge point.
We're talking about a timeline that stretches from the gritty, dangerous streets of New York in 1973 all the way to the upcoming release of High Noon in the spring of this year, 2026.
And that upcoming release is absolutely shadowed by a significant event. We have to acknowledge right at the top that the band suffered a devastating loss in 2025.
It changes everything.
It changes the entire context of this conversation. When we look back at their origins now, we aren't just looking at how they started. We're looking at the formation of a bond that was, in the end, only broken by death half a century later. Our mission here is to really unpack how a band that started in the absolute chaos of CBGBs managed to bridge the worlds of punk, disco, reggae, and even hip-hop to create the blueprint for modern pop music.
That is the essential thread, isn't it? They were genre benders before that was a marketing term.
Totally.
But what's truly compelling and what we need to really drill down into is that their success was never guaranteed. In fact, if you looked at the CBGB's class of 75, Blondie was the band everyone thought would fail.
The least likely to succeed.
Exactly. They were seen as a joke by the more, serious art punks.
It's wild to think about that now, considering they've sold over 40 million records.
It is.
But there are so many of these sliding doors moments in their history where it all could have just fallen apart.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to talk about how a single mistake by a DJ in Australia changed their entire career trajectory. If that one button hadn't been pushed, we might not even be having this conversation.
Precisely. We're going to move through this chronologically because the evolution of their sound really dictates the evolution of pop culture around them. We're starting in the underground, and we're ending with the very tangible, bittersweet reality of 2026.
So let's go back. Let's go back to the concrete.
Wow.
New York City, 1973. We really need to set the scene because New York in the early 70s was not the Disneyland for tourists it became later.
Not at all. It was a collapsing empire. It was bankrupt, it was dirty, it was dangerous.
But in that collapse,
there was cheap rent. There was a lot of empty space for artists to do whatever they wanted. You have to imagine the Mercer Arts Center in Manhattan. This wasn't some pristine concert hall.
No.
It was a crumbling hotel that had been converted into this multi-room arts complex. It was avant-garde, messy, loud. And this is where Chris Stein enters the picture. He was an art student, a photographer, a guitarist, who was deeply embedded in that visual arts scene. He was looking for something that combined the visual with the auditory.
And in 1973, he finds it. He joins a group called the Stilettos.
He does. And the Stilettos are such a crucial piece of this puzzle that often gets skipped over.
They weren't a band in the traditional sense, were they? They were more like a performance art cabaret act.
Correct. They were camp. They were, parodying the girl groups of the 1960s, but with this hard, gritty street edge. And the vocalist for the Stilettos was Debbie Harry.
Now, Debbie Harry's background before this moment is fascinating because she had lived several lives already.
So many. She'd been a waitress at Max's Kansas City, which was the epicenter of the Warhol crowd. She had been a Playboy bunny for a time.
Which is always a surprise to people.
It is. And she'd even been in a folk rock band in the late 60s called The Wind in the Willows. They released one album and just vanished.
It's such a strange visual, isn't it? Debbie Harry in a folk band. But by 1973, she'd shed that completely. She was in the Stilettos, embracing this kind of trash glamour aesthetic.
And Stein joins as the guitarist, and that is where the spark happens. They formed a romantic relationship, of course, but more importantly, they formed a creative partnership. They realized they wanted to do something more than just cabaret parody.
I wanted to rock.
They want to rock. The Stilettos were fun, but they were limited. So in July 1974, Stein and Harry parted ways with the Stilettos and the band's originator, Elda Gentile. They decided to form their own unit.
And they took some of the musicians with them.
They did. Drummer Billy O'Connor,
Mhm.
bassist Fred Smith, but they didn't have the name yet.
Right. They went through a real identity crisis. In August 1974, they were billed as Angel and the Snake for a couple of shows.
Which sounds like a biker gang.
It does. It feels a bit heavy-handed. Then they tried Blondie and the Banzai Babies, which you can see the link back to that cabaret style of the Stilettos there.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
A little bit. But by October 1974, they stripped it back. They shortened it to just Blondie.
And this is so important. I think people assume the name Blondie was just a vanity thing because Debbie had bleached hair. But the origin is much, much grittier than that. It wasn't a compliment she gave herself.
No, not at all.
And this is critical to understanding Harry's persona. The name came from truck drivers. Debbie Harry recounted that when she was walking down the street, truck drivers would lean out of their cabs and catcall, "Hey, Blondie."
It was a dismissal, an objectification.
Totally. So she took that catcall, that symbol of harassment, and plastered it on the marquee.
She weaponized it.
She absolutely weaponized it. By naming the band Blondie, she was taking control of the way men looked at her. It was a confrontation. It said, you think I'm just a blondie? Fine. I'm going to be the biggest blondie you've ever seen, and I'm going to dominate you with it.
And it set the tone for her stage presence, didn't it? She was often so deadpan, cool, almost detached.
Exactly. She wasn't playing the victim. She was playing the character that everyone projected onto her, but she was the one pulling the strings.
So by late 1974, the name is set. But the band itself was a revolving door. They were really struggling to find people who understood what they were trying to do.
Oh, it was chaotic. They had Ivan Crowell on guitar for a short time. He later went on to play with Patti Smith. They had Tish and Snooky Bellomo on backing vocals, who, later founded Manic Panic Hair Dye.
A little piece of punk history right there.
It is. But the rhythm section was the problem. In the spring of 1975, Fred Smith left to join television.
Which was considered the smart band of the scene, right? The art rock intellectuals.
That's right. And Billy O'Connor, the drummer, he left the music business entirely. So Stein and Harry were effectively back to square one.
And this is where the magic happens. They need a drummer and a bass player. And they find the two guys who had helped define their sound for years to come.
They recruited Clem Burke as the drummer and Gary Valentine on bass. And Clem Burke, he is the key here. We're going to talk about him a lot today, especially given his passing last year.
Of course.
But back in 1975, he was this kid from New Jersey who played drums with a ferocious, almost uncontainable energy. He wasn't just keeping time. He was playing lead drums.
He idolized Keith Moon from The Who and Hal Blaine from The Wrecking Crew. You can hear both of them in his playing.
You can. He brought a wall of sound that suddenly made Blondie sound like a force of nature, and then they added the final texture. In November 1975, they brought in Jimmy Destry on keyboard.
Destry was essential. Most of the punk bands at CBGBs, the Ramones, the Dead Boys, they were just guitar-based drums. Very stripped down.
Exactly. By adding Destry's Farfisa organ and later his synthesizers, Blondie connected themselves to the lineage of 60s garage rock and at the same time to the future of electronic music.
It made them melodic. It made them danceable.
And that is exactly why the other punks hated them.
They were seen as too pop.
They were seen as inauthentic by the hardliners. They were playing covers of commercial jingles in their sets. They were dressing in thrift store 60s clothes. They were regulars at CBGB and Max's Kansas City, rubbing shoulders with television and the Ramones. But they were the pop band. They were the ones having fun while everyone else was trying to be dark and serious.
So let's move into 1976. They have the lineup. Harry, Stein, Burke, Destry, and Valentine. They're playing the clubs constantly. They finally get a record deal with Private Stock Records.
And Private Stock was a label known for one-hit wonders and pop novelty acts. It wasn't a cool label by any stretch.
Not a punk. Okay.
Not at all. But they put out the first single, Ex-Offender, in June 1976. And then the debut album, simply titled Blondie, dropped in December of that year.
If you listen to that debut album today, it sounds like an absolute classic. But in 1976 in the U.S., it was a dud.
A complete commercial failure. It didn't chart. The production was a bit thin. It captured their energy, but it didn't capture the radio audience.
Yeah.
They were still considered a weird, underground New York cult band.
But other musicians heard it.
That's the thing. David Bowie and Iggy Pop got a copy of the album. They loved the sound. They actually invited Blondie to open for them on Iggy Pop's The Idiot Tour in early 1977.
That is a massive endorsement. I mean, you have Bowie, the king of glam, and Iggy, the godfather of punk, basically saying this is the band we want.
It's a huge stamp of approval. But even with that tour, they weren't selling records in America. The breakthrough came from the other side of the planet, and this is the accident we mentioned earlier.
This is one of the most famous errors in music history, the In the Flesh incident.
So 1977, the biggest music show in Australia was a show called Countdown, hosted by a guy named Molly Meldrum. It was the top of the pops of Australia.
Everyone watched it.
Everyone. Blondie's label sent over the video for Ex-Offender, because that was the single they were trying to push.
And Ex-Offender is a song about... It's about a sex worker and a police officer. It has a spoken word intro. It is aggressive. It's fast. It's very New York.
Not exactly Saturday night family viewing.
No.
So Meldrum, or the show's producer, made a mistake. Or what looked like a mistake. They didn't play Ex-Offender. They played the B-side of the single instead. The B-side was a track called In the Flesh.
And In the Flesh sounds nothing like Ex-Offender.
Nothing. In the Flesh is a throwback ballad. It sounds like a Phil Spector song from the early 60s. It has that swaying, romantic, almost doo-wop rhythm. Klemberg called it a forerunner to the power ballad.
So the Australian audience is sitting there watching this TV show, and instead of a punk song, they hear this beautiful retro pop song with Debbie Harry looking like Marilyn Monroe in the video.
And they ate it up. It was an immediate reaction. In the Flesh went to #2 on the Australian charts. And because of that one song, the album Blondie shot into the top 20. It was their first taste of real fame.
But there's a theory, isn't there, that this wasn't an accident?
There is. Clem Burke and Chris Stein have suggested over the years that Molly Meldrum might have done it on purpose.
That he was being clever.
The theory is that Meldrum listened to Ex-Offender, thought it was too abrasive for his teen audience, flipped the record over, heard it In the Flesh, and thought this is a hit.
And if he did that, he was a genius.
He was. But whether it was incompetence or strategy, the check cleared. That success in Australia gave them leverage. It proved to the industry that Blondie wasn't just a noisy club band, they were a pop band that could shift units.
And that leverage allowed them to level up. They realized private stock wasn't going to get them where they needed to go globally.
So in September of 1977, they took a huge risk. They bought back their contract from private stock. They signed a new deal with Chrysalis Records, which was a British label with much better distribution.
But this transition came with personnel costs. Gary Valentine, the bassist, left the band.
There were creative differences, and the touring life was wearing on him. He felt his songwriting wasn't being appreciated.
So they needed a new bassist.
They brought in Frank Infante, initially just to play guitar and bass on sessions. Then they hired Nigel Harrison as the full-time bassist. But Infante was so good, he ended up staying on as a second guitarist.
And this solidified the classic six-piece lineup. Debbie Harry, Chris Stein, Clem Burke, Jimmy Destry, Nigel Harrison, and Frank Infante.
That's the lineup that goes into the studio to record the second album, Plastic Letters.
Released in February 1978, and this was a transitional record. It did much better in the UK and Australia than in the US, continuing that trend.
It did. The breakout track was Dennis, which was a cover of a 1963 song by Randy and the Rainbows. They gave it this new wave gloss, and Harry sang a verse in French, which was very exotic at the time.
And it was a huge hit in the UK.
It reached #2. This really established them as stars in Europe. They were on the cover of magazines in London while they were still, walking down the street, unrecognized in New York.
But they still hadn't cracked American radio. And that brings us to 1978, the third album, Parallel Lines. This is the moment where everything, absolutely everything, aligns.
But it wasn't an easy process. Not at all. They brought in a producer named Mike Chapman, and by all accounts, he was a taskmaster.
Chapman was Australian, and he had a string of massive hits with bands like The Sweet and Suzi Quatro. He was a pop scientist.
He was. And he came into the studio with Blondie, and he basically told them, you guys are a great live band, but you don't know how to make a hit record.
That must have gone over well.
Not initially. He stripped them down. He made them do take after take after take. Clem Burke has said he played for 8 hours straight on some songs. Chapman was looking for perfection, not punk energy.
And the focal point of that perfectionism became the song Heart of Glass. The evolution of this song is a masterclass in production. It didn't start as a disco song at all.
No. The song had been kicking around their set list since 1974-75. Back then, they called it the disco song. But it was actually played with this reggae-ish, funky strut. It was slower. It was much looser.
Almost a joke song.
Kinda. When they brought in to Mike Chapman for Parallel Lines, he heard the potential, but he wanted to modernize it. He wanted to embrace the sound of Euro disco that was coming out of Germany, specifically Giorgio Moroder and Donna Summer.
And Kraftwerk.
Yes, the electronic precision of Kraftwerk. And to achieve this, they did something very controversial for a rock band. They used a drum machine.
The Roland CR-78?
That's the one. It provides that ticking mechanical pulse in the intro.
Hmm.
But then Clem Burke comes in with the live drums. And Burke isn't playing a standard four-on-the-floor disco beat. He's playing this very busy, syncopated groove. He later said he was trying to combine the beat from the Bee Gees' Staying Alive with his own chaotic style.
The combination of that mechanical drum machine, Burke's frantic live drumming, the shimmering synthesizers from Destry, and Harry's cool, detached vocal, it created something entirely new.
It was a hybrid, a perfect pop moment. But when they released it, the backlash was severe.
Oh, yeah. You have to remember the context of 1978 and 1979. The Disco Sucks movement was in full swing. Rock fans were literally burning disco records in stadiums.
So for a band from CBGBs, the Temple of Punk to release a disco song was seen as the ultimate betrayal. They were called sellouts. They were accused of chasing trends.
But the general public, they didn't care about the politics of punk. They just loved the song.
It was undeniable. Heart of Glass went to #1 in the UK in February 1979, and then it hit #1 in the US in April. It broke the band globally. It proved that new wave wasn't just noise. It could be sophisticated, intelligent pop.
It sold 1 million copies in the UK alone.
And Parallel Lines wasn't a one-hit wonder. It was front-to-back hits. Hanging on the Telephone.
One way or another, picture this.
One Way or Another is another great example. It's a gritty rock song about a stalker based on an actual ex-boyfriend of Harry's. But it's polished enough for radio. The album sold 20 million copies. It's widely considered one of the best albums ever made.
But this incredible success created a new problem. The Blondie is the singer problem.
This was a major source of tension. Debbie Harry was so photogenic, so charismatic, and the name of the band was Blondie. The media focused entirely on her. They treated the guys in the band like her backing group.
There were headlines asking, which one is Blondie?
Exactly. The band actually had to run an advertising campaign with the slogan Blondie as a group. But the damage was done. The guys were resentful of the focus on Harry, and Harry felt isolated by the pressure of being this global icon.
Despite the tension, they kept working. They were on a treadmill. In 1979, they released Eat to the Beat. And they did something with this album that was technologically revolutionary.
They created the first ever video album. This is years before MTV launched in 1981. They filmed a music video for every single song on the Eat to the Beat record and released it on video cassette.
That is incredibly forward-thinking. They understood that the image was going to become just as important as the sound.
They were predicting the MTV era. They saw the future. The album itself was another massive hit. It reached #1 in the UK. The song Atomic is a standout here. It blends that spaghetti Western guitar sound from Chris Stein with a driving disco rock beat.
And Union City Blue. That song has such a specific melancholic atmosphere.
It does. The lyrics were inspired by Debbie Harry's time living in Union City, New Jersey. She worked there before the fame. The song captures the view of the Manhattan skyline from across the Hudson River. It's a song about longing and ambition, looking at the Emerald City from the outside.
So they're dominating 1979, then comes 1980, and they team up with the very man who influenced Heart of Glass, Giorgio Moroder.
They collaborated on the theme song for the film American Gigolo. The song was Call Me. Moroder had the music, but he needed lyrics and a melody. He originally asked Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac, but she declined.
She was contractually obligated elsewhere, I think.
That's right. So he asked Debbie Harry. She wrote the lyrics in a few hours, supposedly based on the concept of the main character in the film being a male escort.
Call Me is a powerhouse track. It rocks harder than Heart of Glass.
It's pure velocity. It's been 6 consecutive weeks at #1 in the U.S. It was the biggest selling single of 1980 in America. It showed that they could adapt to the slick 80s movie soundtrack world without losing their core identity.
But if we are talking about adaptation, we have to talk about the 1980 album Auto-American. This is the album where they really decided to confuse everyone.
Auto-American is their experimental peak. It's a bizarre record. It opens with an orchestral instrumental. It has jazz tracks. But the two massive hits were genres that no white pop band was touching at the time.
First, The Tide is High.
This was a cover of a 1967 rocksteady reggae song by a Jamaican group called the Paragons.
And they played it straight. They didn't punk it up or new wave it. They played it as a reggae song.
They added strings and horns, but the rhythm was pure reggae. It went to #1. But the B-side, or rather the other huge hit on the album, was the real earthquake, Rapture.
We have to unpack Rapture. Today, rap is the dominant music of the world. But in 1980, it was a localized street culture in the Bronx and Harlem.
It was not on pop radio. Not at all. Debbie Harry and Chris Stein were fascinated by the emerging hip-hop scene. They were friends with Fab Five Freddy, who was a graffiti artist and a cultural connector. He took them to block parties in the Bronx. Rapture was their attempt to pay homage to that culture.
The song is strange. It starts as this slinky funk track, and then halfway through, Debbie Harry starts rapping.
And if you listen to the flow today, it sounds a little stiff. It's very nursery rhyme in its cadence.
Of course.
But in 1981, it was revolutionary. It was the first song featuring vocals that were rapped to reach #1 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100.
And the lyrics are so surreal. She name drops Fab Five Freddy. She talks about a man from Mars eating cars.
It was abstract art pop. But the video featured Fab Five Freddy and graffiti artist Lee Quinones. It also featured a young Jean-Michel Basquiat as the DJ. By putting this video on TV and getting this song to #1, Blondie essentially acted as a bridge.
They validated hip-hop.
They validated it to a white suburban audience that had never heard it before. They opened the door for the entire genre to cross over.
So by 1981, they've conquered everything. Punk, disco, reggae, rap. They are arguably the biggest band in the world, but the center cannot hold. The decline starts happening almost immediately after that peak.
The burnout was real. They had been touring and recording nonstop for 4 years. In 1981, they took a brief hiatus. Harry and Destry released solo albums. Stein worked on Harry's solo record, Cuckoo. When they came back together to record the next Blondie album, The Hunter, the atmosphere was just toxic.
This is where the lawsuits start, isn't it?
It is. Frankenfante was effectively pushed out of the creative process. He wasn't invited to many of the sessions. He sued the band to keep his spot. They settled out of court, and he's on the album cover. But Harry has said in interviews that he barely played on the record.
And The Hunter, which came out in 1982, just isn't a good record.
It sounds tired. It's a concept album about hunting and being hunted, which reflected their paranoia about fame. But the songs just weren't there. It stalled at #33 in the U.S. charts. It was a massive drop-off.
There's a telling story about the James Bond franchise during this time, too.
Right, For Your Eyes Only.
Blondie was commissioned to write the theme for the Bond film For Your Eyes Only. They wrote a song and submitted it.
And the producers hated it. They rejected it and went with a song by Sheena Easton instead. That rejection was a clear signal. Blondie was no longer the it band. They were losing their golden touch.
But the final nail in the coffin wasn't music or business. It was health.
This is the tragedy that defines the middle of their story. In 1983, Chris Stein began to get incredibly sick. He was losing a huge amount of weight. He was breaking out in blisters. He was having trouble swallowing.
And nobody knew what it was.
It took a long time to diagnose, but he had pemphigus vulgaris. It's a rare genetic autoimmune disease where the body literally attacks the skin and mucous membranes. In the 1980s, it was potentially fatal.
So everything just stops.
Everything. They canceled their tour. The band effectively broke up in November 1982. But more than that, Debbie Harry walked away from her career. She spent the next several years nursing Chris Stein back to health.
She became his full-time carer.
She was changing his dressings, feeding him, taking care of him. They lost their house. They went from being global superstars to struggling to pay medical bills.
That period, from 1983 to roughly 1997, is what you could call the wilderness years. Blondie just didn't exist.
No. Harry eventually returned to solo work in the late 80s with albums like Rockbird and Deaf, Dumb and Blonde, but she never reached the same heights. Stein eventually recovered, but the band was tied up in litigation.
The former members.
Right. Nigel Harrison and Frankenfante sued to prevent Harry and Stein from using the name Blondie. It was ugly. It was all lawyers in courtrooms.
But nostalgia is a powerful force, and by the late 90s, the dust had settled.
In 1996 and 1997, Stein and Harry started talking seriously about a reunion. They reached out to the original members. Clem Burke and Jimmy Destry were in.
But not Harrison and Infante.
No, they were not invited, which caused more legal issues. But the Core Four proceeded. In 1999, they released No Exit.
And against all odds, they scored another massive hit with the song Maria,
Maria is just a fantastic pop song. It has that climbing scale in the chorus that is impossible not to sing along to. It hit #1 in the UK.
which gave Blondie a unique statistical record.
It did. They became one of only 2 American acts to have a UK #1 single in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s.
And the other one was?
Michael Jackson.
That's incredible company. And it validated the reunion. It proved they weren't just a nostalgia act playing state fairs, they were still relevant.
Absolutely. But the lineup instability returned. Jimmy Destry, the keyboardist who was so crucial to their sound, he left in 2004.
And the circumstances were sad.
Very. Destry was battling serious drug addiction. It became impossible for him to function in the band. He went to rehab and he got clean, which is great, but the bridge was burned. He never rejoined the band. So from 2004 onward, the original members were really just Harry, Stein, and Burke.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the modern era, leading us up to today. They kept releasing albums. The Curse of Blondie in 2003, Panic of Girls in 2011. But I want to focus on 2017's Pollinator. This album felt like a real creative shift.
Pollinator was an admission, I think, that they needed fresh blood. Instead of writing everything themselves, they solicited songs from modern artists who were influenced by Blondie.
So they had songs written by Sia, Charlie XCX.
Johnny Marr from the Smiths, Dave Sitek from TV on the Radio. It was a who's who of modern cool.
Some fans criticize that as outsourcing, but I see it as smart curation.
It was very smart. It made them sound modern without sounding like they were chasing trends. They also recorded it mostly analog to recapture that 70s band in a room feel. It was their most successful album in years, especially in the UK.
And then in 2019, they did the Havana residency.
This was a cultural exchange. They went to Cuba to perform. It was a real career highlight for them, connecting the Afro-Cuban rhythms back to their own experiments like The Tide is High.
But there was a shadow over this trip. Chris Stein didn't go.
He couldn't. He had developed heart issues and was told not to fly. He ended up recording his guitar parts later in the studio for the documentary, an EP.
And that brings us to the recent history, which is where the story becomes very heavy. Chris Stein's health issues forced him to step back permanently from touring.
In April 2022, Stein announced he had atrial fibrillation, or AFib. The medication he was on made him too fatigued to tour. So for the last few years, the live band has featured Glenn Matlock, the original bassist for the Sex Pistols, of all people filling in on bass, while others handled the guitar duties.
So Debbie Harry was effectively the last original member standing at the front of the stage.
She was, until last year, 2025, the loss of Clem Burke.
This is the event that truly marks the end of an era. Clem Burke passed away on April 6, 2025, from cancer. He had been with the band for exactly 50 years.
To the month.
We need to talk about why Clem Burke mattered so much. He wasn't just a guy keeping a beat in the back.
Not even close. He was the Doctor of Pop. That was his nickname. He played drums like a lead instrument. If you listen to a song like Dreaming, he is playing fills constantly.
Yeah.
Never stops. He had this ferocious kinetic energy that drove the band forward.
He was the engine room.
Absolutely. Without his drive, Blondie would have been a much wispier, softer band. He gave them their muscle, their power. Losing him was like losing the heartbeat of the organism.
And yet, here we are in January 2026. The band did not fold. In fact, they announced a new album.
In August 2025, amidst all the mourning, they announced that their 12th studio album, High Noon, would be released this coming spring, 2026.
And there's a detail about this album that makes it just incredibly significant.
Yes. They had been in the process of recording the album prior to Clem's death. So High Noon will feature Clem Burke on drums. These are his final recordings.
That is going to be a very difficult, very emotional listen, to hear that energy one last time knowing he's gone.
It's a final tribute. It ensures that the classic rhythmic DNA of the band, Harry's voice, Stein's songwriting, and Burke's drums, is preserved on this final document. It's a closing of the circle.
So, as we look at Blondie today in 2026, what is the legacy? We've covered the truck driver catcalls, the number ones, the lawsuits, the illnesses, the deaths.
The legacy is survival. It's resilience. They survived the death of punk. They survived the backlash of disco. They survived the indifference of the 90s. They survived personal tragedy. They are the bridge between the underground avant-garde of New York and the global pop machine.
They proved you could have it both ways.
They prove that you could be smart, you could be cool, you could be artistic, and you could still sell 40 million records.
And they proved that a band is more than just a collection of songs. It's a shared history, a life. So if you're listening to this and you haven't dug deeper than Heart of Glass, go listen to High Noon when it drops. But also, go back Go listen to Plastic Letters. Hear the struggle and the triumph in the music itself.
There is always something new to find in their catalog. It's a bottomless well of pop culture history, a real American story.
Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion on Blondie. It has been a journey through 5 decades of incredible resilience. Thank you for walking through it with us.
It was a privilege to discuss them.
Thanks for listening.